Of course, anyone is welcome to create their alternative UIs to whatever DAOs they deploy through the honeypot. And I expect that to happen at some point, probably not in the immediate future, but like far off into the future is likely. And yeah, I think that's a general overview of what we're intending to build and how it relates to OneHive. Yeah, does anyone have any input? Does anyone have any? Yeah,
I mean, I can add some other color too. So like, and I talk a lot about this in that post that I wrote in the thread, if people have read it, about kind of the history and the evolution of the concept. But we ended up in this case where we had this gardens template, which is very much like what we had originally planned on using as sort of the way to create these other communities, right? We would have the like OneHive DAO, and then people could launch like connected DAOs using a bonding curve, and they'd all show up in this like interface. That was the idea. And so we had this template. This is before we even created the like issuance model for Honey and migrated to XDAI. And it had it's basically the DAO template that the Gardens Swarm is working on, and so it's called the Gardens template. And we kind of had two parts of this project. One was the interface for conviction voting outside of the Aragon client, which is what we use at onehive.org. And we had talked about it being sort of this this kind of platform that Will was describing, where people could create these like DAO organizations, and users could like have a user-centric view where if they're participating in multiple, they can kind of see it. It would be sort of like Reddit in the sense that like you have this aggregate global view of all these DAOs that are kind of connected and using the same sort of like pattern. And you've got like the individual like DAO view or the subreddit view where you can see what's going on just in that particular DAO that you're interested in. And it becomes sort of like this connected graph of communities that are all like working together. And that's kind of the vision for it. And then there was the technical implementation, which was originally we're like, okay, we can use this like bonding curve model to connect all these things, and you can swap between the like tokens, and you kind of create these boundaries between sub communities using the bonding curve. And bonding curves are relatively complex. You have this like bootstrapping challenge where you have to like do sort of like a mini crowd sale to just get the thing started. And that crowd sale might have like legal complications, and it just gets the more you try and launch one of these things with a bonding curve, the more you're like, oh, this is actually like requires a lot of steps, legal steps, technical like understanding of parameters, all of these things that make it relatively hard. And because of that, when we launched Honey on XDAI, we were like, okay, let's simplify this. Let's just use issuance. Let's use the same token for these things, and we'll use Uniswap as sort of the medium of exchange. So if you earn tokens, you can cash out by just exchanging them for whatever you want, whether it's ETH or DAI or stake. You don't need this bonding curve to facilitate that. And we're like, okay, well, maybe we'll still use the bonding curve between Honey and these communities so that like the value of Honey increases as the value of these other communities increase. And from what I've like understood talking to people is that the bonding curve is really complicated, and they don't necessarily want to have that like extra complication built into their token. And so like if people are going to bring their own token or create a new token, they might prefer the simpler model anyway, and you don't have to go through all of this other stuff, and the integration gets simpler. And so like from a product perspective, if I think about like Gardens as a platform, something that we could like iterate to and release relatively soon, there's a bunch of functionality that like the bonding curve provides and creates that we don't necessarily need to get to like an MVP release of this sort of platform garden concept that we wanted. Even if like we had originally intended to use that model with the bonding curve, it's not really necessary now to get to like an MVP. We can allow anybody to create a token or bring a token and just use conviction voting. And we can use the combine kind of the interface. We can integrate with Celeste. We can integrate with Honeyswap. And you just have this relatively simple iterative approach from what we're already doing to allow lots of people to come in and create new tokens on XDAI and launch DAOs. That doesn't require the same uh, same process that it would take to launch one of these like bonding curve based organizations. And so I think I've personally come to that conclusion and kind of been pushing in that direction because I like prefer to do this like iterative approach where we're kind of incrementally adding new features, incrementally doing new things that get us the most sort of leverage for the least amount of effort as we go. Um, and that's kind of the trajectory that I see the like Gardens platform or interface or like the onehive.org interface going down. And then meanwhile, we have this Gardens template and Gardens Swarm that has been kind of working on the bonding curve flavor of Gardens. That's very heavily inspired by Common Stack, and Common Stack is working to launch the TEC with the Gardens Swarm, and so they're very focused on this, like bootstrapping the bonding curve and that process and having a separate token there. And so it's kind of diverged in terms of the goals of the two products, and I think that's why the naming has gotten really confusing. I think both are interesting experiments and valuable. It's just sort of like they're not the same thing at this point because I don't think even if we could kind of converge them and combine them, I don't think we want onehive.org to be a crowdfunding platform where people launch ICOs or um, have to do this like pre-sale thing. We want to be able to just say, hey, if you don't have a token, you can create a token. You're not selling it on the platform. And if you already have a token, great, you can bring it and you can use conviction voting, and it simplifies so much of that process for us. Whereas if you look at what's going on with the TEC launch and the Garden Swarm, they've now created a like hatch phase DAO conversion process. They've got like some sort of KYC requirement to join an association, and they're going to go through this kind of hatch phase. And I don't know whether it'll work or not. I'm really eager to see. I'm planning on participating. I think it's a really interesting effort, and I really support all of that work. Um, but I don't see it as something that like fits that vision of somebody coming to the website and being able to launch and use conviction voting for a community in like 5 minutes, right? Like, it's not to say that like you'd be able to launch a successful community in 5 minutes, but like it shouldn't it shouldn't be so involved that you're like spending months going through this process doing like legal due diligence, which could very well be valuable, like depending on the context and what you're doing. But it's just sort of like it's a different idea or a different concept, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think that was kind of the impression that I ended up with, and it's kind of why I ended up starting those threads and making the comments that I did. To begin with, to clarify, I really didn't know what the Garden Swarm were building. There's not a lot of technical specifications, and it took a lot of digging into the code that they were writing to actually understand that a lot of what they're doing is great stuff. Like it's really useful, and I am really interested to see how it turns out. But it's not something that we would be able to reuse in this particular, in our kind of perception of what we're trying to build, basically. And that's kind of where, yeah, how we got to this point. Yeah, does anyone else? Sorry, go ahead.
Okay. So I think from what I'm getting, you guys have like your own point of view about this like commons template. So uh, you would say that maybe some of the pros can be well, this like it's more of a like a fundraising focused kind of like initiative, but at the same time, speaking about cons, uh, you guys see like many legal challenges in applying bonding curves, and also, I mean, from what Luke said, is some details like requiring a level of KYC for hatching can also be another con of the commons template. So am I getting this okay?
Yeah, and then the workflow is also pretty divergent, right? Like the hatch phase, it requires launching this DAO and then doing kind of like some votes on the DAO and then converting to a bonding curve, and it's this really like complicated process. But but it's also a complicated process that's unique to that template. Whereas like if we add the ability for people to create a new token or bring their own token, the workflow for them um, is the same workflow essentially as we already have on the platform. So we're not building a whole bunch of extra stuff for this one template to incorporate it into the platform. So I wouldn't really have a problem if we wanted to like say, okay, this flavor, the commons template that has a bonding curve, um, can be used in the like the onehive.org interface. Um, if the like all of the hatch complications and stuff happen somewhere else, maybe you could like figure out how to fit that in, and we just kind of like have an exchange widget that like uses the bonding curve as well as like Honeyswap or something like that. I don't think that would be as complicated, but it's also not one of those things that I'd want to immediately try and do. It's sort of like um, if you're doing like product feature prioritization, you're like, how can we get the most utility for users with the least amount of like one-off changes or like engineering work? And I think that's kind of the other piece is like if we try and incorporate this template that is quite a bit different. Like it's got multiple components that are different, it's got multiple processes that are different, it's got multiple expectations that are different into this generic interface, we create a lot of problems for ourselves. Whereas if we limit the scope to just say you create a token or you bring a token and you use conviction voting and dandelion voting, the interface is essentially the same. We have like a couple flavors, but the flavors are much closer together. That like we are reusing a bunch of the code. It's like relatively easy to handle and kind of maintain the platform to support those use cases. Whereas the Commons template thing introduces a whole bunch of dependencies and requirements for the platform to support for it to actually function and be integrated. So I think that's the other kind of divergence. It's like even if we wanted to support the Commons template as a flavor, it's not like a minor integration piece. Whereas the other two flavors are kind of like you get a bunch of advantage because you're like, oh, anybody can bring a token, or like anybody can issue a token, but you don't really create nearly as much integration work. I don't know, maybe some of the people that would be doing the integration work there can back that assumption up. That's the like just my perspective is kind of like looking at what would be required from a product perspective. But
Look, another interesting thing that my word for tree is how do you think that our flavor of gardens could leverage the honey token, because we allow people to create communities and deploy their own tokens, but how is all that tied to honey in some?
yeah, I mean, I first of all, I don't think that we need to explicitly tie it to honey for it to be valuable for us, because it'll be integrated with Celeste in terms of dispute resolution, which will use honey for dispute resolution, and it will create new tokens that are native on XDAI that would naturally end up being swapped on Honeyswap. And so like we generate fees from that as well. So I think even if like we didn't have any integration with Honey directly, use of that platform would accrue value to OneHive in the sense that like you get more adoption on the platform. You get more people building on the platform. You get people issuing tokens. You get people using Celeste. So I think that like by default that's plenty. But I think that like we can also do things like make it so you create, like, if you are issuing a token on the platform, you set aside part of the supply and you deposit some honey, and that kind of creates an initial liquidity pool, and that acts similar to the bonding curve. It just does so in a much less complicated, hard-coded way. So we could do that as sort of like part of the initialization process for a new token. Or if you're bringing a new token, we might say like you need to have a certain dollar value amount of like honey liquidity so that we can ensure that when people are swapping between tokens in order to use the platform, that there's some baseline level of liquidity in order to show up on the platform. And that gives us another way to like integrate honey in a way that's not super intrusive, and pretty like pretty simple, but just also make sure that the platform works consistently.
Yeah, that's where I was oriented my question. If, for example, in order to deploy a token, you need to, I don't know, add some liquidity to the with a honey pair or something like that. You know.
So
Okay, and do you think this could be an exception with the commons template? Like, do you think this actually like works in a different way for impacting honey and just how it blends, with what you just described, Luke?
Yeah, I mean, I think that you having more tokens on XDAI, like if people are launching these like commons things, is also beneficial to us. And like I said, I support that work in general. I just don't necessarily think that it's a smart idea for us to try and integrate that template into the onehive.org interface, following kind of the vision of Gardens, because we don't want to go down the route of being like, okay, this is how you like do a Hatch crowdfund, promote your crowd sale thing, because it creates legal complexity. It creates a lot of complexity for users. Like it's like for the same reason that the TEC hasn't launched yet, because there's a lot of required steps to kind of get comfortable with that sort of thing. I think that it's valuable as like a standalone thing, but I don't know if it like makes sense to integrate it. And I guess that's sort of where we've got this sort of strange question with regard to Gardens, because you've got the Gardens template that or the Commons template that may end up becoming its own thing for the TC, and maybe they make it so that's also a factory so other people can repeat that process, which would be cool. I think that's the vision of the Commons stack. And then there's the like the Gardens as a platform thing that I see sort of like Colony or DAO House or Aragon, where people are like, I want to come use a web interface to like launch a thing and then use this tool. But it's a tool. It's not like a platform for doing a crowd sale, right? It's like you can issue the token, you can, I don't know. It just seems like a much more narrow, simpler scope than what's happening.
So if OneHive is not going to integrate the Guardian template, who's going to do so? So if the TEC going to integrate the template using the Guardians, who else going to do so? I think their product or what they're trying to do, it need adoption from other DAOs, like from my understanding so far. It's kinda depending on the community and how DAOs work. Is that like something true, or just I'm not seeing it this right way?
Sorry, I'm not sure I follow exactly. Can you try repeating?
So the template that Guardian is trying to to have. From my understanding, one hive is not going to use it, right?
I mean, so I always have a hard time with this where we're like, one hive is not going to use it, because I totally consider the garden swarm and even the TUC and common stack as part of one hive, right? Like we are all one hive, and we're not making concrete decisions. But I don't think the onehive.org like website, like I don't think that interface. I don't think it would make sense to try and integrate these things, because it would create um, a lot of one-off kind of user flows. Like if you're trying to do a design or thing, you like think about user workflows. There would be a bunch of user workflows specific to this template that wouldn't be required at all for these other templates. That like we can go build those now, integrate it, and have it work, and just not do any of that stuff. And if there's a bunch of demand for that stuff, maybe in the future we integrate it. But like, it doesn't seem like it is the kind of highest leverage thing for us to do on the onehive.org interface right now, I guess is what I would say. And like, I know that like is sort of a non-answer, like, but the thing is we're a DAO, so like we can't be like OneHive is never going to do this, or like OneHive has no interest in this thing, because I think there's lots of people within OneHive that do have interest in the like common stack template and the TUC launch. Like I totally consider them part of the community. I think and I think we will use the Gardens template, the bonding curve thing. I think that's super fascinating, and I hope it happens. Like, I'll support that proposal. I just think that right now there's a lot of confusion because we're using the term Gardens to both describe this like TEC template, but we're also using it to describe this platform vision that like has completely different goals and priorities at this point than launching the TEC and the hash and stuff like that. And so for me, it's like fundamentally a question of like communicating the difference between these two things, because they're, at least for now, completely divergent. Who knows in like 6 months or a year after like the TEC has launched and maybe it's a successful pattern and more people are doing it, we're like, okay, this is mature enough that we can be like, okay, let's converge these things and have it just be a flavor on the interface. I don't know. But I don't think we should be assuming that's the case at this point, because it seems significantly divergent, and we probably should be talking about it as, say, the commons template or the commons swarm working on that thing, and then like the garden swarm or something else working on the onehive.org interface. And I don't really care if they want to use the term gardens. I would love to use the term gardens for the platform, because that's how I had originally envisioned it. But if they like feel really strongly that they want to use that name, that's fine. We can just call it the like onehive.org DAO factory thing, or come up with a different name for it, right?
Yeah. So just to make sure I am understanding this clear, so the TEC, they have a product which is called Guardians, and they have also Banding Curve, which is different from the Guardians, right?
Gardens, I guess, is like we called this Aragon DAO template that included this bonding curve implementation that we worked on, conviction voting, dandelion voting, redemptions, and like a few other apps, as the Gardens template. And that was called the Gardens template because we had planned on using it as part of this like Gardens platform thing. Now they're using it sort of as a reference implementation for the common stack, which it was inspired by, so it totally makes sense. And trying to launch the TE Commons as like the first commons stack reference implementation launch, like first user, right? And so that's great. But
so from my understanding, is like Guardian is the head, and it has some banding curve and have TEE. Or it's just like the banding curve is like the same level of the Guardians. Like, do you have to the template once you have the template, do you need necessarily have the banding curve with it, or you just like it's like future that come up with the template from the Guardians? because it seemed like they have a lot of products in their hand, and it seemed they are overlapping from each other. And once I'm trying to understand like how I can map it out, it seemed like this product or this idea or whatever you can call it, they overlap from each other. Like I understand like Guardian is like template, and does it necessarily come with the banding curve? Like then once we have it, do we have
Yeah, I
the
mean, I think it's semantic. Like, that's the root of the issue here is a semantic one, right? Like, we have the concept of gardens that we've used throughout OneHive to refer to this like platform idea that Will and I have been talking about. Um, we've referred to it as a specific like template, so a set of like smart contracts tying different Aragon apps together, and we also have the garden swarm, which started to kind of focus on this gardens template and the launch of the TEC, but also is sort of saying that it's like broader and that gardens is any sort of conviction voting down. They just happen to be focused on this particular flavor right now. And so it's like there's a strong lack of clarity around the term gardens. And so like from my perspective, I would love to use it for the platform because that's when I came up with the name and that's what I wanted to use it for. But it's just a name. Like we can use it for something else. We just need to decide what we're using it for so that everybody can understand and it doesn't mean everything at once. I guess is where I'm at. And I think we have a call with the Garden Storm. Like I feel kind of weird that we're having this call now, even though all the people in the Garden Swarm that would be representing the other side of the like representing the want to use this name for some other purpose aren't actually here to express their opinion on the issue. So I don't know. But,
I think it's fine. Like this call was really meant to ensure that we're all on the same page, I guess, or at least understand amongst ourselves what it is that we envision for gardens, because it is still confusing within our community. So I think this was really just to establish our own understanding amongst ourselves and to help us understand whether we think between us or independently the terms these things, different things. Basically, will still have this conversation tomorrow, and maybe they'll be able to convince us otherwise. And I'm open to this, but yeah, I think it's fine. I think it's good for us to collectively have a bit of an understanding before we try and discuss it with them.
Yeah, just one last thing. So from my understanding, like Luke came up with the name of Guardians. If that's true, does that mean it's like Guardian is part of one hive? Like it's not like TEC thing. It's like one hive and TEC thing. It's like
It's open.
yeah.
It's open to interpretation, really. I mean, Luke came up with an idea. He labelled it gardens, but it's all a bit amorphous, this DAO business. And then the Swarm came along and kind of thought, oh yeah, we like this idea of gardens. Let's try and adopt it and build it. And it just turns out that what they've ended up building is very different from the version of gardens that we intended to build. It's still extremely valuable, but it just is fundamentally a very different project. And so these two things have basically diverged. The thing is, it kind of hinged on the fact that they fought or they used some code that we will also use. But we're just going to modify it slightly differently to the way that they've modified it. But we're going to modify it quite substantially differently now, it turns out.
So
So
yeah, yeah. So it's are they are they the one who building, or we are the one who building? Like which one who? Yeah.
The Garden Swarm will not be building the One Hive platform gardens vision that we've been talking about today. The Garden Swarm, as it is not building that. They are building the TEC, commons kind of version of a DAO, basically, which was kind of the original vision for gardens, but the vision for garden has changed within One Hive. So, yeah.
Yeah, I mean it's a very organic process, and I think that like I think why I'm pushing back on this like us versus them kind of thing is that I don't think it's like that at all. I think it's just sort of like when you have a DAO like we do, you have ideas for projects, you have intentions, and work gets done on them as people decide to do that work, or they take initiative, or they make proposals, right? And so there isn't necessarily a clear like canonical thing that's like, this is what Gardens is within One Hive. There's like a history of the idea, right? There's like, and I linked to this in the forum post, there's like a Google Doc that I wrote that was originally a pitch to the Aragon Association to like allow us to like get funding from them to do a bunch of work on this DAO template, and kind of launch something. That approach didn't necessarily make sense. But a lot of the ideas there are still really sound. And then some of the details of the idea, like using the bonding curve, were sort of listed there as a technical way to achieve some goal where there's like a boundary and there's liquidity between these communities. And over time, we're like, okay, well, we could implement it that way, but it's an implementation detail, and it's not necessarily the case that the original idea, where we're like, oh, we'll use a bonding curve for this, when we were writing that a year ago or whatever, is the right technical approach from a product perspective to get where we're going or get to the end goal. But in the case of like the TUC and Gardens, that technical approach, they care a lot about the bonding curve as like part of what they're trying to accomplish. And so they've taken this Gardens template that we worked on, and they're trying to productionize it, and make it ready for end users. And so like there's kind of a fork in this concept of Gardens, and I wouldn't say one is more canonical or the other, right? There's like the one that I think is really valuable for like the onehive.org thing, and maybe we care more about. I like, hard to say. But then there's this other version that like, if you look at the naming convention and the history, I think has equal equal grounds to be like, oh yeah, we're the true vision of Gardens because we had this like bonding curve thing, and it's evolved into this thing, and we're iterating on that concept. I think it's totally fine that like you have a concept in a community like this, and two people or two groups or two ideas sort of emerge out of like a single idea, and they go in separate directions, and maybe they reconverge, maybe they don't, but like ideas work that way, right? You have an idea, and maybe somebody interprets it slightly different, and they go off and run with it, and somebody else takes that same idea and goes off and runs in a slightly different direction, and you get to, eventually you diverge enough that you get two conceptually different ideas that are potentially both interesting or valuable. And right now we're kind of at that point, I think, where you've got two ideas of Gardens that are both interesting and valuable, but like we haven't we haven't actually like formalized this idea that they're two separate things. And so it's really, really confusing because we're like, when we're talking about Gardens, we don't know which one of these concepts we're talking about.
Yeah, I think the same. Will ask good question in the forum about the Celeste. I think he asked how I don't want to put words in, well, but like how Celeste is going to benefit from the Guardians. Like, is Celeste from the Celeste perspective, like how Guardian going to get into all this? I still didn't find an answer.
The relationship between Celeste and Gardens is purely that Gardens in the vision that we kind of envision, and in fact the one that the Commons guys are building, they're just new DAOs, and they will also use Celeste in the same way that One Hive will. At the moment, you probably don't have a very good reference for this because Honeypot still hasn't integrated Celeste into the way that it works. In the future, once it's integrated, basically we will generalize and copy the whole structure of One Hive that uses Celeste, and in order to engage with Celeste, you have to use Honey. And basically, that's the way that Celeste is integrated into Gardens. Every garden will require interaction with Celeste in one way or another, which will require use of Honey. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes sense, but are they going to change the Celeste and change the honey? Like, if they
No.
they cannot, like, they cannot work it out, like, or
Mm, they will use Celeste. They will use our version of Celeste in their DAOs.
I see.
So that will be one mechanism for which is one way in which they are supporting our community
Cool.
directly
Cool.
with the honey.
Cool. Yeah, Celeste is
Yeah.
going to be a cool thing. Yeah, go ahead, Joey.
Sorry, Boring. I have 2 questions. First one would be, how do you guys think that fundraising could fit in your vision of gardens? Like, regardless of what Commons is doing, of what Commons template is offering to its users, how do you guys think that fundraising can fit into your vision of onehive.org, to say it in a way?
I think in the future there's a chance that we might want to use it, but to reiterate what Luke has been saying, for the short term, it's not really part of the plan because it would introduce a lot of complexity.
Are you talking about fundraising, the Aragon fundraising app? Or are you talking about the concept of fundraising in terms of like somebody doing a token sale?
The concept.
Yeah, I mean, my feeling is that indirectly there's sort of a difference between what we did with Honey and OneHive and how we've capitalized that org without doing a crowd sale. I think that's totally possible, especially if we say, like, in order to create your token, you want to put up some honey and we'll add that to the liquidity pool. And now all of a sudden your token has financial value and can be traded on an exchange. You never did a crowd sale. You never asked anybody to give you money. But because your token now has value on an exchange, the tokens that you have in the common pool now have value as well. And when you use proposals to distribute them, the people that receive them can choose to hold them, or they can sell them on the exchange and kind of take some of that value to go like pay their bills or whatever. So even though we don't want to do a crowd sale, in the traditional sense where you're like, oh, we want to raise X amount of X dot in order to launch our token, and we're going to go use that to like make proposals and do stuff, you still have like a fundraising element. It's just a very like a much safer fundraising approach than I would say like trying to ask people for money directly is to put in your treasury. Just from a legal perspective, it's a lot easier to say, hey, this is a token, it has this utility in terms of staking, we've issued it, you can buy it on an exchange, but you're not buying it from us, you're buying it from the exchange, or you're buying it from other people, right? You're not buying it from like an issuer that's going to be your core team or anything like that. So it just simplifies things a bit, but you still have that same dynamic in terms of people being able to capitalize their organization and get things done and attract people that want to support the project.
Okay, gotcha. And my last question would be, what do you guys think could be like let's say that in a way, our intention to make a decision to maintain like the original Gardens vision is a measure to keep value for One Hive, for Honey. What do you think could be like the worst possible scenario in which the Commons template can directly affect One Hive's objectives? In the both in the short and the long term, I guess.
I guess I'm not sure what you mean. I don't think the Commons template has really any like negative impact. It's sort of like a public good that like if people in the One Hive community find it interesting and useful, like that's great. We can continue to sort of support it. I really like the idea of the TEC launching or like more DAOs launching with the Commons template. Like it's in the same way that I'm super excited for Colony launching on XDive because it's a different like workflow. It's a different thing. But the more people experimenting with DAOs and issuing tokens on XDAI, the more opportunities for us to collaborate. Like when the TEC launches, they're going to co-fund things like the Luna Swarm with us because it's a mutually shared interest, and now we've kind of tapped into that. So there's opportunities for sort of positive sum collaboration because we've expanded the XDAI ecosystem, the community, we've built strong bonds, and I think that's great. Like I don't I think that there's situations where we're going to fund things that are going to have intangible benefits to Honey and OneHive in the community. Not everything that we fund has to have like a direct like tie-in to the Honey token to actually create value for the community. Just like Morphosis is something that we've funded. That's great, right? Like there isn't necessarily a way that that's going to directly result in revenue for the community. But people are taking classes and they're being introduced to the OneHive Discord. We're training people in skills that they can use to contribute. And so there's this like indirect relationship, and there's just this general idea that if we grow a community, we help our community thrive. We help people that join the community like improve their lives. Like we'll end up benefiting from that in the long run. And I think culturally that's really important. I see supporting the TEC and supporting the Gardens template as sort of in that vein, right? It may not have a direct thing. It may have an indirect thing, right? More tokens on XDAI, more successful DAO launches will result in future ways to kind of collaborate. It will result in more tokens being traded on HoneySwap, which does give us direct fees as they integrate things like Celeste, which I think they're planning on doing eventually to that same template. That creates another opportunity for people to touch Honey and start using Honey, and I think that's great. I don't know if that answers your question well enough.
Yeah, mostly, but like putting an example, like a specific example, like some of your concerns are legal. Um, would it be like a concern of yours if Gardens in a way got involved with the Commons template, and there could be like legal issues around Gardens, and like does it worry you that it might affect directly like the whole Gardens project because of those legal issues, or you don't think that this really has anything to do with how it could affect it
I mean, I think that like there's not really any risk from OneHive's perspective in terms of participating in creating the software and stuff like that. I think I'd be much more concerned if we were like, oh, we're going to integrate this crowdfunding portal on OneHive.org because I happen to own that domain, and I might have personal liability associated with that. And because it like feels like there's much more legal stuff, I'd be like, oh, we need to figure out all this legal stuff, and that just adds to the things that you have to figure out that you don't necessarily have to figure out if you're taking a different route. I think that's my concern on the legal side, is that it's a really high friction, high cost, high like I don't know. It's something that has to be figured out if you're going down that route, right? And I think that the Common Stack people and the TEC Commons are trying to figure that out. That's why they do KYC, and you have to join the association if you're part of the hatch. They've spent a bunch of time, not necessarily even like they're doing a tremendous amount of work on this thing to figure out some of those details, which I think is awesome. But I think that like because they've figured out all these details and you have to do all of these different extra steps, that's part of the reason that like it becomes harder for us to integrate it, because we don't necessarily want everybody to have to follow all those steps. So we just don't want to give them on the platform that option. If they want to go do that thing, they should go launch a Commons using that template, right? And they can go through the hatch phase and then go through that whole process. But I don't see it as like a problem that there's multiple options for people.
Okay, got it. Well, I think this helped me a lot to understand you guys' perspective. I don't know if anyone else wants to add something else, but yeah, I mean, so far this has helped me a lot. Thank you all for your time.
No worries, Chewy. Yeah, does anyone have any other comments to make? Otherwise, we'll wrap this up because I think this stuff would, like, a lot of this are kind of, would be better discussed with everyone tomorrow. I think the general level of the platform is useful for everyone to understand, but the more gritty details of the comparisons and things, I think tomorrow is the place to really discuss those things.
Hey guys, long-time liquidity provider on the platform. I think you have the right idea, just building the architecture, and then securities laws can, people can figure that out based on their jurisdictions, and just being kind of the de facto home for like DAOs on XDAI, and kind of keeping liquidity on HoneySwap. I think that's the key, and I think what you're now doing, the cash grab or keeping things on the up and up, I think will bode well in the long term. But just for my thoughts over hearing to this, my first lounge voice discussion meeting, I think you have everything, all your ducks in a row, and sounding good.
Thanks, man, and welcome. I haven't seen you around here before. Your perspective is definitely welcome. Cool. So, should we?
Yeah. I think we're good, and yeah, I'll talk to you guys tomorrow in tomorrow's meeting. Thank you so much. I'll definitely take some of these discussed things and include it in the recap, which I'm about to start writing. So yeah, I guess we can also count on having more participation from the rest of the community in tomorrow's meeting. And yeah, let's see where this heads. Thank you
Joey,
very much again for your time. And yeah,
Joey,
go ahead.
did you record this?
No,
I
I didn't.
I have it recorded. So if everyone okay with me recording their voice,
Yeah.
no problem. Or do you want me just to keep it hush hush?
No,
I'm good. Actually, I think it can help to get some points for tomorrow's meeting.
Okay, sure.
So yeah.
I will upload it to the YouTube that we've been working out, and they can just see it from there. Cool.
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 Yeah, thanks, man.
Okay. Ciao.
Ciao.
See you guys. Have a good day.
Bye. Yeah, thanks. Bye.